Hello, pre-AP Chemistry. This is Miss. So how to name binary molecular compounds. Now I want to say a few things here first before we get started. Up to this point we said compounds are any two elements bonded together, and molecular are two atoms bonded together. Here's a clarification on things. Technically speaking, a molecule in chemistry terms is any time two nonmetals bond together or more. Two or more nonmetals bond together. And ionic compounds actually make formula units. But I'm just going to say, and generally speaking, compounds are compounds, molecules. I'm not going to get into the big difference, but you guys need to understand when we're talking about molecular compounds, technically we're speaking about nonmetals. So when we go to name these things today, up to this point we've had a cation and an anion, a positive thing with a negative thing. Today we're going to deal with nonmetals, which in theory, as far as when they become ions, they become anions and gain electrons. And so it's really hard to make those two negatives become a zero. So we don't worry about charges right here because it's a different type of bond called a covalent bond where the electrons are shared. So an ionic compound that we've been learning about, it's because they were transferred. So one electron from one, the metals, were gained by the nonmetals. That's not the case, so just some background on bonding. But so right now we're going to worry about binary, which means two molecular compounds. So we're dealing with two nonmetals, and because we're sticking with binary, we're only going to deal with two at a time, and we're not going to worry about naming the complex ones. So naming two nonmetals. Again, molecules, technically they're called two nonmetals, so they're not positive, negative, so we have some new rules. So molecules tend to be two nonmetals. They're not positive or negative, so there's some new rules for naming them. A general idea here, don't worry about charges. This is where we're going to see prefixes. I've had a couple questions in the past of where in the last couple days on where the dies and tries. This is the only place we're going to use them. So we're going to use prefixes only when you have two nonmetals. So the prefix mono means one, di means two, tri means three, and tetra means four, penta five. So fix that typo there. Di is two and tri is three. Rules for naming molecular compounds, two nonmetals. The first element has the smaller group number is first. If in the same group, the higher period. I'm just going to tell you this. I'm never going to switch these up. So when you go to name them, you just name the first element. How to name it is if there's no prefix, if there's only one atom. So if there's only one atom in the first element, you don't need a prefix. But if there's more than one atom in the first element, then we use di, tri. The second element, the prefix is indicated the number of atoms. So every time you go to write this, the second element will have a prefix, and it indicates how many atoms you have for that. So you use the root of the second atom, and then you add IDE like we've been doing so far. So IDE means that the element is bonded to something. Thirdly, the O or A at the end of the prefix is usually dropped when the word following starts with a vowel. For instance, we say monoxide, otherwise it would be called monoxide. So instead of having two vowels together, because that's not real good grammar or English, we drop an O and call it monoxide. So in general, the order of nonmetals in naming is carbon, phosphorus, nitrogen, hydrogen, sulfur, iodine. Seriously, guys, I don't think you really need to write this part down because I'm going to just go with how it's named. So here's some examples, which is the important part. When I name no, and that's not telling you can't do something, no, I name the first element, nitrogen. There's one of them, so I don't need any prefix. And then the O, how many O's do we have, is one, so it's monoxide. So nitrogen monoxide. Second one is N2O3. Since we have more than one nitrogen, we have to say dinitrogen, and then there's 3 oxygens, so trioxide. So how do you write formulas for these molecular compounds? Again, we're using 2 nonmetals. You just write the formula and put the subscripts according to the prefix, so it makes it really easy for you. So don't worry about the charges. When you're dealing with 2 nonmetals, you can't get 2 negatives to be a 0, so you don't worry about charges. You just write the subscript according to the prefix. So, and remember, if there's no prefix on the first element, it means there's 1 atom. So here's some examples. Carbon monoxide, if we write carbon monoxide, carbon is C, oxide is O, and mon means 1, so it's going to be CO. Diphosphorus pentoxide, di means 2, so there's 2 P's and 5 oxygens. So that's your quick lesson on molecular compounds. Hopefully you learned it. Be ready for it in class on Thursday.